So thank you for being here, everyone, for another Wheaton conversation. My name is Marcy Peterson. I'm the technical marketing technology director at WheatonArts, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm broadcasting from southern New Jersey, which is traditionally the land of the Lenni Lenape. Again, I'd love to hear from you in the chat, and we would love to know where you're listening in from. And if you want to add how you heard about this series or this evening's program, please let us know as well. Just a few things to point out before we get started is that there is live transcript should be on. If not, I'm going to double check that now that I say that. But it will be on, and you can watch the closed captions should you need that. We are going to ask that you place your questions to be part of this conversation in the Q&A area. I'm going to monitor the chat. I'm also going to put some great links in the chat for you to follow along. You can download that chat, or you can contact one of us for the chat afterwards. I think that's it. I'll move on now to get us started as soon as I thank our sponsors, and that is PNC Arts Alive and the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass. Also, you can support Wheaton Arts through membership, donations, and shopping. Those are some of the links that you're going to find in the chat. Again, you will ask questions in the Q&A, but you'll find those links in the chat. And now it's my pleasure to introduce my coworker, Alexander Rosenberg, who is the Glass Studio Director at Wheaton Arts. And over to you, Alex. Thanks for being here all.
Thanks, Marcy, and thanks everybody for coming tonight. I'm really pleased to introduce our two speakers tonight. Both of them have kind of a strong connection to the fellowship program here at Wheaton. So we'll start with Anna Mlasowsky, who has a BA in glass from the Royal Danish Academy, and then holds an MFA in sculpture from University of Washington. And she's the recipient of the Artist Trust Fellowship in 2017, who works in the collections of Corning Museum of Glass and Toyama City Museum. But she's been to Wheaton in a variety of capacities over the years, but I just learned yesterday that her fellowship at Wheaton Arts was her very first residency. And now, as I'm sure she'll tell you a little bit, and you'll be able to see kind of hopping to these different residencies all over the world is the way that she produces her work. So very, very excited to hear from her. And next, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about our other presenter, Jessica. So Jessica has a BFA from Tyler in glass and an MFA from RIT in glass. She currently heads the glass program at the Tyler School of Art and is the president of the Glass Art Society. Jessica has been done Wheaton Arts Fellowships a couple of times, and that's also where she co-founded the Burnt Asphalt family, which is a kind of performance cooperative group. And that collaborative project has performed all over the country. And now they're both going to tell you a little bit more about their practice, their work together recently.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Marcy. It's really exciting to be here. I think Wheaton is definitely near and dear to my heart for many reasons. But it's really fun to be here with Anna. I said yes because Anna asked. I was like, oh, Anna's asking, sure, whatever you want.
Yeah, you've been to Wheaton just this year with a group of students, right? While I was at Tyler.
Yeah, we just started recently bringing students back down. Yeah, but done a couple residencies and have a residency coming up. But, I think, one of the things that Anna and I were talking about was that, to Marcy earlier, as we were like talking about our relationship, is that, I've always been an admirer of Anna and her work for so long, but I never had the opportunity to be able to like spend a good amount of time actually really having amazing conversations, talking about life and work. And we've just done that for the last 2 years, which has been really quite amazing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I guess for everybody that's listening to, I had the same, it was kind of the same thing. We live on the opposite coasts. And so even though we're really familiar with each other's work, and I had to come to Tyler in 2017 to give a lecture to the students together with my partner, Matt, while we were actually at Wheaton as well. We've never overlapped in any other capacity. And then I approached you and Tyler, you as a representation of the GLASS program, as a professor there and the head of the program, because I was doing a fellowship at the Science History Institute in Philadelphia for the past 2 years, and kind of wanted to see if it would be interesting for the students for you to have me come and work with them in some capacity. And like that's how kind of this whole interaction got started. And it's been incredibly rich for me to be able to do that. And you've provided me with an enormous amount of resources and generosity, and I got to get to know the program much better. I'm really impressed what built over there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really important to point out, like, and I think about your practice all the time, that you have such an amazing skill at creating opportunities for yourself. And so to be able to have your presence at Tyler and create this experiential learning opportunity for students, like it was a very casual thing. You said, how could we have a partnership? And then I started to list all of the ways. And then it built,
Yes.
I was like, well, come over. And it built into this thing where it was not about like a really specific outcome. It was more about you coming and being able to have space and time to explore and to think. And I think that that's, part of our pedagogy there is, really allowing students to see how an artist can start out a project, to research, to work through it, and then see an outcome maybe later from that.
Yeah, and thinking about the time that we got to spend together through my presence in Philadelphia and the engagement that you supported with the students, we've all started like talking more about work and like seeing overlapping themes. And so I was very excited for the Wheaton conversations to talk to, and to just kind of have us present our work and talk about some of the similarities of common needs that our work have. And so that's kind of, for everybody that's listening today, that's kind of going to be the structure of our conversation. And I think we should maybe get started talking about kind of the first theme, which is also what kind of brought us together, that in already 2018, I ended up writing the Science History Institute in Philadelphia. I'd found them through an article in the National Geographics where they were talking about rare earths. And so I wrote them because I saw they have a fellowship program and was very interested in becoming a fellow. To the Science History Institute is an institution that does research and supports research, and they have a museum and collection and an archive about chemistry. And so I proposed to research rare earths in connection to glass. And so this was a project, as many of my other projects as well, that had this relationship to science. And really through that science research process, I ended up meeting Jessica more and be spending time at Tyler. And I think I'm going to start off showing some of the work that I've been doing at Tyler. So I'm going to share my screen here for everybody. Let me know if you can't for some reason. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Jessica,
Yeah.
yeah, you can see
Yeah.
my screen. Great. So just to get, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly also because we have so little time and these are just test pieces. But I think often when we give presentation, we only show finished work and we never actually get to see what goes into an artist making the work. And specifically what I was doing at Tyler was getting an extensive residency over 2 years, spending 4 months total at Tyler, so already a whole semester, and having the students watch me work through a project. So one of the pieces that I was doing at Tyler was that I was taking satellite images of rare earth mines around the world, the 5 biggest rare earth mines, and then each of the kind of topographies going down into the earth became outlines, and made first a tiny model. This is the Mountain Pass mine in California. From that, while I was teaching in Poland at the Eugenius Gebhardt Academy, they had a huge laser cutter. So I made wooden templates for all the molds in the scale I wanted them to be at. So the biggest, the Bayano mine that you see there as well, is almost 5 feet long. So while I was at Tyler here, the molds, I made over 60 in weeks of there, and Tyler has an enormously big studio in which I was really able to make a gigantic project. And for me, it was really the best place to do a casting project, and I've never worked with casting before, so 60 molds, first casting project ever. So it's really great. Also students seeing that artists often dare a lot when they make projects. They do things we don't actually know. And so the glass I'm using here is a glass from the old factories on the East Coast in North Carolina. And it's a rare earth doped glass that under different lighting is either this beautiful opaque lavender or then turns to white. And so these are some pictures from some of the pieces made then at Tyler. And here it's kind of the beginning and end photo. Jessica took a photo of me with all of my outlines, and then while I was packing it up, you have this glass piece. And this is a small model that I had made in Poland before to even figure out how can these go together. So each of these different lavender castings, those rings that I make, get all stacked up and put together into these mining vessels that will stand upright then. I think every one of them is about 200 pounds that it's gone away. While I was in Tyler, I was also I was doing at the Science History Institute, looking at images of mining factories. And so these cages that you see in these images are closed in the mines. They're also still used today, so they're not just historic. And while I was at Tyler, I also went up to the Rhode Island School of Design and worked with some students. And then also while I was at Tyler, I had regular blow slots every week where I worked with students where we really made production. So we were making 50 hangers, 50 parts for everything to make 50 cages in a final in the same space as those mining vessels. And they're going to be also hung under the ceiling. So we were pulling cane 3 times a week. It was really amazing also having that support. And this was a book also I found at the Science History Institute, and I was using the symbols to determine from geologic survey maps to determine mineral in the ground to work on the video piece. So this is me at Tyler mirrorizing sheets of glass, and that's how they got packed up. And so I just partially mirrored these sheets of glass, and each of the patterns is a symbol. And then I went out last summer into the American desert and started filming on this project where these mining symbols are hovering over the landscape as kind of this capitalist way of looking at our environment as like a place of extraction, resource that supports our breathing and living. So this is mining shaft is the symbol in the middle. Then we have gravel and sand. And so I'm working on this video piece that is a continuation. And besides, of course, the project that I was doing in Thailand, in the past, I've been working with scientists before. This is a piece from 2013 called Resonance, and I'm attaching a piece of metal to a speaker cone, sprinkling black glass powder on it, and it's all connected to a power source and an amplifier. And on my computer, I have a program that lets you play frequencies within the audible range. And then whenever you hit a resonant frequency, a pattern will form. And so the higher the frequency, the more complex the pattern. And if you hit non-resonant frequency, you get no pattern at all. And so then the glass powder patterns were put in the kiln and fused, and then they were hung in a space. And there was a motion detector so that when people would walk under this cloud, the sound cloud, as I thought of it, you could hear what you can also see visually in a space. So it was a way of visualizing sound. And I worked with of different research institutions. I worked with a professor of music from the University of Berkeley who made the composition for me. I worked with the Leibniz Institute, a physicist, to help me. And it was exhibited in Sweden in 2013. Another piece that I worked with scientists for is the Chorus of One piece, and that has just been acquired by the Museum of Art and Design, and it made it in between 2016 and 2018. It took many years to complete, and it is made from a material that Corning Incorporate, which is the largest research group for glass in the world, has developed, and it was developed for body armor. So it's bulletproof and shatter resistant. It went into the plated body armor. And then I worked with dancers that were activating piece. And only because it's shatter resistant and performs, because it can't. Yeah, and so that's a material that's not available to any artists usually. And just because I had the residency, the Corning Corporate Specialty Glass residency, I was able to get access to the material. And we were, of course, kind of looking a lot at, for the choreography with the dancers, how animals use kind of defense mechanisms, plated body armor, and how they use it in their environment. So that's kind of, for me, the last piece I want to show today that kind of relates to my relationship with, and I would like to hand it over to Jessica to share her work as well.
All right, Anna, can you see that okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. So I think, when Anna and I were talking about the topics, we were talking about she was there because of science. And I found it really interesting because science has been something that I've, researched and considered in a lot of different ways and has come into my work. And so one thing is that, science comes into just how we make the material, as glass makers, and how we figure out how to anneal something, mold materials, to dyeing a furnace, and understanding different compositions of rare earth, like Anna was researching. Also using like the scientific method of research for experimentation within my work, and also my pedagogy of like really figuring out how to experiment and how to test and what that means. and how you can take something and push that forward. And then also conceptually of thinking about science as something, as a belief system in a way. When somebody says it's scientifically proven, people say, oh, that's fact, that's truth. And I believe there's no absolute truth in anything. There's maybe approximate truth, but no absolute. And this is something I found when I was in graduate school in a 1950s science book that was supposed to define the perfect proportions of a face to define beauty. And so I was interested in how that could actually define beauty, in the sense of how are we looking at beauty? How are we categorizing things? How are we, once we do make a category, who's left out? And how we're scientifically defining aesthetics. And is that actually even possible when we start to get into it? And how oppressive that can be. And so just for an overview a little bit, since we're doing this kind of casual, we didn't rehearse this either, so we're just kind of winging it a little bit. I think some of the things that are within my work is the language of science. So thinking about symbolic systems, networks, and connections. A lot of my work has a duality of simplicity and complexity, using marks that you'll see in graphs, using graphic primitives like points, lines, curves, simple shapes, things that suggest data. Other things of other processes of actually growing crystals or things like that. So I'm going to talk about kind of two projects with this, but I'm hoping that my work, even though it might seem just separate because they've happened at different times in my life, that there's a fluid crossover of process and materials, and a diverse set of approaches to making. So this is a video that I've used in multiple shows, and sometimes it's projected, sometimes it's on a screen, and it's of artist saliva, of thinking about perspective, of thinking about the macro and the micro, thinking about how we perceive beauty. And this becomes a landscape, it becomes a moonscape. It suggests something that's otherworldly, but then also microscopic. It also is, something about identity. And when people start to discover what this material is, there's an automatic a grossness, there's a response, there's a something that is kind of off-putting about knowing this. I relate the saliva to glass, that it's transparent, it's fluid, it has a life force to it, it has a moment. And I also think about now, these were made about 10 years ago. And I think that now, thinking about COVID, they become somewhat threatening. So these are large format photograms. So using the enlarger as something to project this information onto glass that also has inscribed language, from graphing systems of trying to understand how we exist in the world. I also was inspired by looking at this video that's crystals that are growing out of blood. So again, another discard of the body, and that's transforming, thinking about, the crystal similar to the snowflake, that it has the same kind of language visually, but none of them are ever going to be the same. These pieces that are created from this are made in suspension and defying gravity. And I've also been interested in thinking about the belief system applied to crystals. Throughout history, people believe that they possess powers. And so I'm looking to create a synergy between the manufactured and the mystical. So this is flame-worked black glass or white glass that then is submerged into a bath to create objects like this. And so there's a whole series of these that I've been working on. They come out and they're relying on each other. They're a relationship that has been built, that both one is formed on the other surface, and the other one's being held together by the crystal. And then these are embellished in different ways with like gold leaf, and presented in multiple contexts. So that's, I'm going to stop there, Anna, for that section. Okay, I did stop sharing.
Yes, you
And
did.
so we are able to take questions from the audience in between each of these little sections. So, but I think I can get you two started with one while we wait for them to come in. I'm interested in, I think it might be interesting for some people to hear a little bit more about the process of Anna. It sounds like you kind of cold called Jessica Tyler to say like, what can we do together? And I love that. I think that might be interesting for, you know, artists in the audience, like how can we work with institutions? And then Jessica, from your end of things, like what were some of the options? You know, has something like this happened before? Like, you know, what do you do when somebody approaches you with something like this?
Yeah, I mean, what I can say to that is that a lot of the things that I have done in my life have come out of me going, I'm here, I'm doing something. It could be interesting to you, if not, totally fine. But what I've noticed in the past is that institutions are always interested in seeing what artists do, and they can't always keep up with everybody, with every artist where they are at currently, what they're doing. And then it's often this way, like, what, you were just in New York for the last 3 months, we should have done something together. And so instead of always like after the fact having people find out that you were just somewhere and were just doing something, I've just always reached out, and I've done this from the beginning. And it's really, opportunities don't come to you. It's kind of like waiting at home for the prince on the white horse to coming to swoop you up and take you with. No, you're just gonna have to go like looking for that prince or the princess, wherever you want this to be. But it's not something like, opportunities don't usually come to me. Other artists it might happen, but to me, I have to like seek them. And even in the beginning, when I just started out, I'd graduated with my undergraduate degree and had applied to the study, which is an exhibition program in Europe at the Museum of Glass in Denmark in Ebeltoft. And so I reached out to the New Glass magazine and was like, hey, I'm doing this show. Do you want to write an article about me? And I ended up on the cover of their magazine. I had just finished my undergrad. And the only reason why is because I asked them if they wanted to write about me. It's not because they thought I was that great. And I think that's often the problem in art, that there is a perception of an artist and an artist's opportunity and an artist's career, and then there's the reality of their life. And what I've found out in the past by talking to all the other artists around me is that it usually is not the way it looks. And so institutions have always been very receptive to talking and looking at opportunities and figuring out how I can work with them when I've reached out, which happened with Tyler as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will say, you know, that's like, you're really good at that. I think you maybe make it seem easy, but the way that you wrote to me and how you described the project and kind of left it that you weren't expecting anything. Wasn't like, oh, I'm coming, I'm expecting this thing because I'm in town. And it was just really like, hey, like I'm here. If there's something that could happen, I would love to do that. And so there was no pressure in the ask, you know, and I think that that's a good suggestion for people trying to do that. And so you have a real skill with that.
Good. No.
You do. It's something I think comes natural for you. But I would say that, you know, in the past, like to Alex's question of like, you know, we're always searching to have artists come in and engage the students. and to get them out of the bubble, to not be the only people talking to them. And Tyler's facility is phenomenal. So we have the resources to be able to do that. And so it's happened in a lot of different ways. Like, for example, Jason Manami is at Glassroots in Newark, and which is not that far away. And he's an amazing glass blower, an amazing person. So I called him and I said, hey, why don't you come and just blow glass every Saturday? And then students could be able to work with him, and get to learn from somebody, if they want to be really good glass blowers, then they get that opportunity. So same with Anna, said, hey, I have this project and the research is amazing. Her work is amazing. So it formed into studio visits and critiques. And, the other side of it is, lecture. You're really generous too with your time and energy. And so I think it just kind of feeds this circle of like giving and support that we need more of in our community. So
and the thing is really with the what's really good with Tyler, and I think that is, you deserve basically all the credit for that, is that you always think about what could my students need, what could be good for them, what did I need when I was that young. And it was very interesting when I was there, we would always like meet in between your classes and things you had to do and like chat for a while. And there was this one time where we were talking about how you were a tech right at the beginning when you started out. And I think seeing how many different positions you've had in your career makes you be very, very much able to kind of go like, where could my students land? What could they all do? And what would be good for them to know now, so that they kind of set up in a good way to then go out and be successful, whatever path they choose. And for me, it was also really great that you were talking about, at some point, we had a conversation where we were talking about how you have changed from thinking everybody needs to become this like big independent artist, make millions and have lots of big exhibitions at the biggest institutions, but that there are many different paths within our profession where you could either become a designer, you could work for somebody else, you can go work for a corporation, you can be a teacher in a high school, you become a university teacher, you become an independent artist, you can become a mix of everything. And it also has a lot to do with personality of the individual student, what is really something that they would be comfortable with, that they would want to do, that they can grow with, and also their different interests. Somebody is maybe more interested in community building than they are in this really kind of egocentric career management, what I am in a lot of ways. And I've been trying to find ways out of that. And it was really interesting for me to see that, how you've just kind of been so empathetic with the different options and also limitations that students might have that will kind of determine where they will go. And like, speaking of limitations, I think that brings us kind of to the next part, that the section that we wanted to talk about, because I think we have, each of us, experienced quite a bit of thinking that we had limitations in one or the other way. We had a conversation when I was at Tyler, and I didn't know that about you, that we both struggle with forms of dyslexia, that I have dyscalculia, which is a number dyslexia, and you have dyslexia and some number dyslexia as well, and how you run a program, you have to be write mails all day long, and have to, we both in our own ways, I have to make budgets and manage my career. I have to get on flights all the time. I miss a lot of flights because I can't remember the dates and the times, and numbers just make no sense, right? And how that's impacted our work. And I think that was something like a big moment, because often artists, we feel quite not necessarily ashamed, but having limits is not a positive thing necessarily. And acknowledging that is something that's really important in order to kind of grow and also be in a good place to get help from others in places where we need that. And so I'm going to share my screen again and talk to a little bit projects that have been impacted by, because not, if we're thinking about dyslexia as a thing, then we're also talking about language as an obstacle. And I think a lot of, there was a study that I saw at some point, how a lot of artists have dyslexia, and that the way our brains are set up when you have dyslexia is just different. And so I've always looked at art as a way of overcoming dyslexia and a type of language, and a language I speak very comfortable. It doesn't need words. It's my own language. And also, you know, as an immigrant, a foreigner, it's an external visual language that doesn't require me to use words to express myself. So I'm going to share my screen again. And unfortunately, it didn't quite work the way I wanted. So I have to go from the beginning here again. So this is a slide. I'm just showing that real quick. You can see I was working on a project that I'm just going to show you next, and I had laid out all these different tubes, and they all had one spot where they had to go, and so they all needed to be numbered. And you can see here we go from 74 to 45 to 76 to 78. And that is from me just numbering 0 to 100 and something all the way through, which is going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I can't even do that. So people often don't understand how severe dyslexia can be and how it really messes up everything you do. And in art making, there's an enormous amount of planning and labeling and numbering and caretaking of inventory, layouting that's involved when we go into the process of making. And it also, you know, making art, the other thing that kind of comes into that is using data as an information and as a form of language and tell us something. And it's really interesting how I often make projects with science and numbers, even though I don't understand. That's maybe especially why. So the piece that you see here was made in 2019 for an exhibition at the SUNY Purchase College. I was a Wingate visiting artist there for a semester. And what I was doing here is that have these 3 different, what do you call them, scrim walls of tubing that is freestanding forms, and each of them models the hormonal cycle of a female born person over the course of a month. So we have estrogen, progesterone, the LH and the FSH hormones that ebb and fall over the course of the month. And it was the structure you could walk through. And it all came out of the assignment of genders to numbers. There was a concept that I had found in a book called Symmetry in Architecture by Ken Williams. And apparently we have even numbers and odd numbers. The even numbers are considered female and odd numbers are considered male, and female numbers are avoided in architecture because they're considered weak. So when you go in churches, you have always odd numbers of arches, windows. All the architectural patterns are male numbers. And already this goes back to the Bible, where it's mentioned that even numbers should be avoided, female numbers. And so based on that concept, I made this architectural intervention that uses the data of hormones in our body as this architectural intervention that you could walk through as a different way of working through numbers. And it's interesting how that, of course, also relates to my number dyslexia in a lot of ways, but also another project that I did was called Books, is from 2016, and it was this 2-channel video installation in which on one side of the room you could see a box with clothing and then my head, and on the other side you could only see my boob and crotch area, and I was putting on clothing and taking off clothing. So the dress that I was putting on there is the dress that I wore when I entered elementary school. And I found my mom had kept all my clothing from when I was a child, and they still fit me. now. And so this never growing out of being a child and still fitting into the clothes that you owned then. I still have a jacket I wear every summer. It's kind of a crop jacket now. It's my old jeans jacket that I had from when I was 5. And with these 2 videos, I also had these photo prints where I found photos of me wearing the clothing and then overlaid them with images of me wearing them as an adult. And the only thing that kind of grew were my legs and my arms. Even my face still matches when you overlaid it in Photoshop, the transparencies of my face then and now. And so really this kind of feeling often, because for many years with the dyslexia, I always felt like I was stupid. I struggled in school. I dropped out of high school, and being in this place where I felt like I was never living up to a kind of adult expectation and having no way to express this really put me in a lot of difficult places through my life. So that was a piece that somehow relates to these feelings that I was carrying as well. And then this is a piece called As Advertised, and it's 2 television screens that are hidden inside these boxes that have sandblasted glass in the front. And on one of the TVs is shown advertisement that is directed at men and as women. And here is a short clip from these videos. So on one side, we have advertisement that's for beauty products, and the other one for male viewers is mostly for Doritos, frozen food, body deodorant, Bud Light, insurance, whiskey. And so this kind of color coding, again, with using data, color coded data as ways to look at heteronormative consumer culture and those influences of how we can use data and also visual language to inform the way that we think. Was very interesting to me at that. And there was the piece that was also at that exhibition at the SUNY Purchase College. So the last piece I wanted to show with that is a piece that I'm still working on. So while I was at Corning, I was working on this book I still have finished. 2016, it's been a while, and it's a book that has invisible writing on it, and whenever you breathe on the page, legible, and then they fade again as the breath vanishes. So it's the same that happens in your bathroom, and it's like hydrophilic and hydrophobic coding, so water repellent and attractive coding. And what is really nice when you read that book of it's really from beginning where it says become like water, the become like water in the end is only become
Anna, I'm gonna stop you, Anna, and ask if you
become,
can repeat. I got a lot of breakup on this particular time, and I think everybody's gonna want to hear. I heard you say you brought the letters up with the words up with the breath, and then it became very garbled after that.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So you have you breathe on the page, the words become visible and invisible, like on your bathroom mirror. It's like hydrophilic and hydrophobic coding, so water repellent coatings. And through the ending of the breath, where it's water, then it's become like, and then at some point you only have become, and the last 2 letters that stay are B. So the way that it works to read changes when you see it. So in the end, you only have B, and it all vanishes. And so for me, it's this really interesting overlap of like language and being able to project. And I'm going to hand it over to Jessica again to talk a little bit about her.
When you do start again, you might have to take off your video because it again.
Okay.
There were just blanks.
Yeah.
Oh, Zoom. We're all a little used to it now. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that was going back to that conversation where Anna, and I both, like, we were just kind of standing in the hot shop and we were talking about things, and we were talking about language and some of the obstacles we both face. And so I didn't discover that I was dyslexic until I was an adult. And I struggled with spelling, I struggled with reading, things like that when I was younger. But the philosophy in my household was like, oh, you struggle, work harder. So it was just like, figure out a strategy, figure out how to keep moving. And so, in my mind, I think, what has happened from having the gift of dyslexia, and that's how I talk about it now, is that I have the ability to see the space in between and to discover the undetected and connect the invisible. And so, going to like how the brain functions, there's different synapses and spaces within the brain where things are starting to connect. And dyslexia, I think, helps me be a good educator and program head, because I can see how alternative strategies rather than the norm. It helps me be a good community organizer, and just bringing people together. And it comes into my work in a lot of ways. And so I have a drawing practice, and I do a lot of process drawings. And they came about really when I had my son in 2012. It became, another kind of shift in my life where all of a sudden I have a child and there's a different amount of energy of where I could be, what I could do. And this was something I had been doing previously in other work, but has really grown since then, out of kind of access needs too. And so I think, our limitations help to define what we can do. And so the rub-on letters are transfer sheets, and I order them off of eBay. So I urge anyone that finds them, please let me know, send them to me, because they are artifacts, and I only have a certain amount of them, and they help to create kind of the limitations in the rule set for each drawing. So on the right, you'll see like the pencil with the blue and the orange. So I'm rubbing a letter off onto the page and transferring it over. These are suggestions of noise. They are suggestions of chaos, organizing. There's clarity in them. Thinking about space, thinking about things that exist in the world and how we reference those. Thinking about how language, constructs our mental lives, and it also shapes the way we think. It shapes our navigational ability. And so to think that if you're dyslexic or you have another, another thing that is another gift, that might allow you to see things that other people don't see. Thinking about these drawings as a way of creating atmospheres, of restructuring kind of a known system, making things so that it is not that they are not, they're still giving a symbol, they're still giving a meaning, but it becomes less verbal and more emotional in a sense. So looking at structures, this one has around the edge of these circles is all K's and then T's. I think about the fonts, I think about other kinds of systems in the world that I'm responding to. They're meditative. This one's made of all capital S's. And so there's something that, I think I will probably continue for a very long time. Because I'm so active socially and, running a program and doing these things, this becomes something that's really important to me in my studio. And another piece that I wanted to show alongside of this is a piece that's hit multiple iterations and kind of keeps growing. So a lot of my installations do that, is made out of multiple parts that then that are dictated by the space. So they transform depending on where they are installed, and they keep growing depending on the amount of time I can devote to them. And thinking about black glass, these are made of all of these little parts. So this is black spheres of glass that are fused to copper wire. suggestive of data, suggestive of maybe ink or like kind of a spatter or even a sneeze within the space. They overlap these drawings. They become another kind of atmosphere around them. And because they're on this thin wire, they all, with the slightest breath or you walk by them, there's an anxiousness to them. So they all start to kind of shimmer or shake a little bit. And suggestive of communication within the space. So just thinking of time. And there's Tyson, who I take to, he's my best assistant. He's photographing the work in this exhibition for me. So I always like to throw him in a little bit because he is a partner in crime. So I'll pass it back to Anna and we could start and have a little bit of a conversation.
Yeah, I was wondering, of course, if there are any questions from the audience at this point to the section we just talked about.
So I'll get one started, and then we actually do have one in the chat, which I'll ask the two of you after that. But the first thing, I was so interested to hear about this kind of discussion around dyslexia, and I forgot the name of the similar kind of cognitive difference that you described, but
Dyscalculia.
yeah, dyscalculia. And specifically Jessica talking about it as a gift. I think something, you know, as kind of an artist working in glass, working as an educator, we kind of get exposed to different types of intelligence that are like kind of harder to measure, maybe, especially like in a classroom. And I wonder if that kind of jives with your experience, like if you think that being an artist or your respective practices has kind of opened up like alternative understandings of intelligence.
Well, I mean, I think that it goes to back to some of the things Anna was saying earlier, like empathy, of allowing you to really have experienced not learning in the social norm of education and not fully fitting into that and trying to find ways to navigate that. And I would say that all artists are really doing that in some way. And so I don't know if I would say it's necessarily like thinking about intelligence. It's more thinking about all the different types of learners and how diverse people are and kind of their needs to understand things and process things, and adjusting to that and creating accessible learning spaces. And that takes a level of kind of empathy that I think from having had that experience, you know, kind of then comes through within the pedagogy too.
Yeah, and I think I've heard people talk about how different some other person's emotional intelligence or social intelligence is. So the ability to take social cues or emotional cues from others and be able to process them and respond to them. And I think that artists, we are using our social and emotional intelligence often more than our fact-based intelligence, to like learning content intelligence in terms of just hearing something and then giving it back to the world. We do an interpretation of that. And for that interpretation, we always need our emotional and kind of social intelligence. And then, of course, these also we train them, I think, constantly through the work that we do. And then they become assets in the work that artists are also really good at, which is often community building, community activation in there, wherever they live. And we see this over and over again, how artists are often people that start small endeavors to try to make things better for everyone around them. And that is an enormous amount of kind of emotional and social intelligence it takes there. And we practice that through the way we process the information that we receive constantly in our world and then put them into some kind of visual form. So yeah.
Yeah.
I'll give you one more from the audience now, and in the same
Mhm.
breath, I'll encourage other audience members to, if they have questions, just enter them into the Q&A panel, and I'll continue to feed them to our panelists. We have from Susan Gogan. Can the two of you speak to the importance of artist residency programs in your evolution as an artist and the need for support for such programs, especially now?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that. I think this is one of the reasons even I agreed to this, because like we were talking about in the beginning, Wheaton is a really special place. You can do things there that, you can't do anywhere else in the world. And when I got out of grad school, and then in 2007, I was there, it was life-changing, and it became a place that you could be selfish and you could make, and you could really focus on the things, and things came out of that were really crucial. We're losing resources for artists constantly right now. Schools are closing, programs are closing. There's less money being offered. And so there's going to be even more of a need to be able to do this. And, glass is expensive. And so we need to support organizations like Wheaton that are doing this. I mean, and Anna, you can speak to residencies. You've had way more than I have had. So, and gone through a lot of different types too.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically how I make my work, because I am not in a place where I have studio access naturally through my job. I hope I'm not breaking up. It's all kind of weird right now. And residencies are an enormous gift, because oftentimes what I've noticed when I, as an artist, apply for funding for my projects and just try to do it through grant money to support my projects, there's so many limitations tied to them. There's so many requirements tied to them. And the residency is usually often this place of free play where somebody just like opens the door to a room, says, this is your studio, good luck. Now you have a month or 2 or 3 or half a year, and you do whatever you want in here, and you do whatever you want with the resources we give you. And for me, I see really an enormous need for less money being spent in administrating artists to perform in the way that the institution that they host the residencies at want the artists to perform, and rather give them more free money or free space to use the resources they get and use the money that they are just able to use them the way that's most appropriate to what they want to do. So there isn't a trust that we need in artists as well, that they will use the resources we give them in the best ways they will see fit to whatever they want to do with it. And that is something that I kind of hope will happen more in the future, because there's this tendency to over administrate programs. And that's the thing with Wheaton, for example, and also Tyler. I could do whatever I wanted. And that is the biggest gift that I could really get. And I really enjoyed having that freedom, and really only because of the freedom I could really make any projects. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to, so we are almost out of time, and we have kind of only gone halfway through what we had prepared for today. So Jessica, I wanted to ask you what it is that you would kind of in the end want to talk about. We were kind of having left over to talk a little bit about like heritage and origin, or talk about material experimentation.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm
What do
open.
you want
I
to
can
do?
kind of tie both of those into each other quickly.
Okay, why don't you share your screen then again, and we kind of move through the last slides that we can share before we at the end of the hour. And
Yes.
I know we have a couple minutes extra, so.
Yeah. So Anna and I were talking about kind of origin stories of like how we exist in the world, how we, where we've grown up, how that informs our practice in a lot of ways. And we were going through, and I was like, I think every single piece I could show and talk about like why that has been influenced about my upbringing. And so just quickly, like I grew up, my father was an art teacher for middle school and a football and a basketball coach. And we would move, I lived in York, Pennsylvania, and York, Pennsylvania does suck. So sorry if you're from there, but it does. And for many different reasons. It's a place of extreme poverty, of there's a lot of racial strife there. It has gotten better over the years, but it still is kind of a complicated history. And I grew up in the city schools, and where with a really diverse group of people. And then in the summer, I'd move in with my aunt and uncle down in Ocean City, New Jersey. And so I was like in this other place that was really quite beautiful and free. And then the people that lived there all had these mansions. Like I was staying in a room with my cousins, all my clothes were in the garage. And it was just so my parents could provide some kind of something for us. And we were taught like, oh, this is a privilege. This is like, be thankful. And then all of my friends that I made down there they were all white and very wealthy. So I'd go from these like two different worlds and like really created this kind of awareness of how am I navigating these things? How are other people? What are the causes of that? What is, what kind of awareness do people not have in how they're existing if they've never kind of been put in other kinds of situations? And so that has created like a duality in my life. I'd say the other thing that is major is having a child. And I showed a picture of him earlier, and I will never stop talking about this. He's my best creation ever. And what I've learned from him is that I've relearned the world through his eyes of making. And so like you can see a sketchbook there. I was like, let's do some drawing. And then, here we're making like sculpture and tying things down. And so thinking about, kind of that evolution of how we are who we are and what shapes us, helps me be a mom too, and an educator. And then going into, I'm just going to skip through a lot of things pretty fast, Anna, so it just ties some things together. I was thinking about even the question, that Alex asked, and it was, about intelligent and these things. If anyone has ever, felt other, there's a certain level of fear in that existence. And so I had that growing up, and, which created a lot of anxiety. And this is a piece that, has continued. It's currently up at the Tacoma Museum of Glass right now. This is at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and it's made out of thousands of black glass threads of glass. I was actually pregnant the first time I was installing this piece right there. Extremely emotional, cried every day because of the hormones. And but this piece was inspired from a reoccurring dream that I had since I was little, of this three-dimensional black line that would start to vibrate to the point where it would wake me up. And so thinking about how do we embody fear? How do we take risk? How do we approach things in different ways? This has hit many different iterations. I think, again, these pieces are things that I start them and then they evolve. And sometimes they occupy like just small corners of spaces, like the discarded, like the dust, to places where they become like the hierarchy. Thinking of another origin story, I think of Wheaton, and in 2007 met this amazing group of people. So there's Marette and Sarah and Erica. And it started another part of my practice. This was a residency in 2011. That, I never thought I would be a performer. I'm a very deeply shy person, and not like socially at a party, I can do that, but like putting myself into other situations is really extremely difficult. And what happened at Wheaton was that it really organically, the Burn Asphalt family was formed. And it was because we were finding outlets at night and building community and building support systems, because we all felt that way. And it turned into something where we've been collaborating with Erica Rosenfeld, who is like my best friend and artistic soulmate, on this group of bringing other people in and community. That involves having artists, educators, chefs, cooks, fabricators, to put on these like really, large events, exhibitions. We're curating things now. And when we're away from each other, you can see she's wearing me on her shoulder right there because I wasn't there. Edible installations, things that are performative, things that this is black raspberries and a black red velvet cake that is then cut and the audience is participating, breaking down ideas of these boundaries between the audience and the performer, creating sculptures and installations, hot dog machines, lighting, so I think that was another like really important kind of origin story was that happened later in life. And I think your origin stories can kind of hit you at different moments, right? Like you don't have to be defined by how you were born and then that's it. Anna, should I stop there? Or should I go into like some material and experimentation?
Go.
Okay. And so like the other thing is then thinking about, we started talking about how our practices are similar and how we're experimenting, we're pushing the boundaries of the material. And I think that that's where, again, back to that idea of fear and always pushing myself to take risk and be uncomfortable. I also do that with the material. I'm obsessed with black glass. I think it's absolutely, it's seductive, it's beautiful, it's absorbing light, but it's also reflective. So it says a lot of things. I was also thinking a lot about transparency and reflection. So this piece or this series of work is done with reflector beads that these are airport grade reflector beads that you find in the paint on the street. So it is an industrial material that I'm using in very similar ways to create these installations, these panels, these drawings that they respond to your movement as you move about them. They begin to change, they absorb light and they reflect it back at you. They're meant for safety. And so I think just conceptually that was really poignant for me of this idea that here is this material that's needed for safety. And so how can this create other types of borders and protect us? So you can see I've done a lot of different iterations. This piece here, I got a cultural grant from York, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. And it was a really important piece. And I did an exhibition, What Are You Afraid Of? Pre-pandemic. And I had a 40-foot room that I blacked out and created this installation in made out of these reflector beads. They were something that became like a nebulous, I'm going to skip the video, but it's on my website if you want to take a look at it, that you had to cross this threshold of darkness to approach this thing and to investigate it. And I worked with 90 middle schoolers talking about fear and risk and response to this work, which was pretty phenomenal. And this has also been shown in some different iterations and once in Philadelphia. I'm going to move through this piece a little bit faster. So again, thinking about material and experimenting, many times some of the work will start with something like this. And then I have all of these parts and they begin to do other things. So I was thinking about the radiation in the air and when we communicate, how that's pulled into a television set or a screen and becomes static. And what that information is all floating around us. And it is the intangible becoming tangible, which created these other kinds of fluid, what I was calling static puddles. And so thinking about what creates borders, what is the viscosity of that material, thinking that, that reflects and does, some different things back to the viewer. So I'll stop there, Anna, and then I'll pass it off to you.
Great, thank you. So let me again share my screen. I'm gonna try to turn off my camera now. I can't actually do that here. So this is a video, and I'm going to skip through some of that shows my neighborhood in 1990. And I was born in East Germany. And so I was born in an environment that was really shaped by occupied houses, anarchy, punk, techno. And everything was very run down and kind of in this communist time left abandoned, but there was an enormous amount of opportunity. And growing up in an environment that was really ruins, grew up in a way where whatever you wanted to make possible was possible. And so experimentation was really something that was started from the beginning. This is an old not bathroom, swimming pool that's close to my house, and they actually rebuilt it now. So the relationship to where I come from and also my home has always been really important. And now my slides don't move at all. There you go. This is a private performance that I did in 2019 where I stitched the word Heimat, which means place of belonging, into my hand, and then watched it vanish over the course of 2 weeks. And the nice thing is the last picture on the end there, down at the bottom, you can see that it says, first it was Heimat, then it was he at, and then in the end it was only at, which in English is also a way to describe place or a specific location or spot. Thinking about how Heimat, now having lived for 19 years as a foreigner in different countries, has changed, and like how it's what my physical attachment to it was kind of there. Another piece that this is an image of is a piece about the Hungersteine, which are the hunger stones, so-called, in the riverbeds in Europe. So there's one in the river of my hometown in Dresden. These boulders only become visible during drought conditions, and then they're inscribed with the date and the time. Every year, and whenever they would become visible, a famine basically loomed because it meant it hadn't rained forever. And so in the one that's close to my hometown, it also has another inscription besides the date, and it says, "Wenn du mich siehst, dann weine," when you see me cry. And so I was kind of responding to that and making a piece with multiple video channels. So this is a TV monitor under a pile of rocks with these glass rocks on it that you could see the video through, and around it was flowing all this dried out clay on which these droplets were laying. And then there were more screens in the room where you could see this woman gurgle and spit and snot and drool and cry on the screen. And in the same time, metal was liquefied in the hand. And that was for the Goethe Institute in Seattle, a German cultural organization. Another piece relating to kind of my changing relationship to my identity was this piece with, in collaboration with Ellen Jing-Su. So we built this kaleidoscopic room that the viewer could look into through this kaleidoscopic extension, and we were on the inside performing. So we did a number of performances, but this one, the longest, was this 4.5-hour performance. So you lock yourself inside this mirrored room, and the room is just a mirror. We were really interested in how a mirror has no own identity. It just reflects its surrounding. And looking into how we were both, Ellen is from Inner Mongolia, and how we were both kind of thrown into this American environment and felt like our way of building our new identities was just reflecting our environment. And then in terms of material experimentation, that of course also overlaps with my heritage. So this is a piece called Heritage, and it's from 2009. And I had moved to Finland and there gotten a pair of socks from my mom that my great-grandmother had from the wool of her own sheep. She used it in the Second World War to make products she could sell in exchange for anything that she needed. And so I was thinking of that spinning wheel that was sitting in my great-grandma's house that nobody knew how to use anymore, and it had kind of lost the use and functionality. It turned into this decorative object. And so I was trying to reconnect with her practice through my own, and kind of trying to think about the importance of past technology for our present condition and state that we are in, and like connecting, not losing the connection to the past in order to understand where you are at the present. So I was spinning glass on this spinning wheel and making this piece, and it was interesting how difficult it was actually to learn this other craft technique for me. And I'm going to skip through. In the end, the piece was shown with the spindles as well, exhibited. Because of time, I'm just going to skip the video here. And Atlas is also a series of works that I'd made on how we often see when we work in glass is something breaking and cracking as the end of our work with the material. And I used it as the starting point to kind of go, okay, I'm going to start investigating where everybody ends, everybody else finishes. So I made these kind of topographical pieces with cracks and controlling cracks. I also made this series of pins where I reversed what was material and void, and by rubbing the ink into the broken glass, the negative space became the positive space, and the material, the positive space, vanished. And out of that also came this piece called Membrane, in which through the breaking, I was able to transform something hard and solid and rigid into something flexible. So there's a body moving under it. And the piece was also shown with the glass draped over a chair and with the video projection in the background. And that piece was bought as one of the first video acquisitions together with the next piece I'm going to show you by the Corning Museum of Glass. So that made me really proud to have museums also start collecting and thinking about glass not as an object making practice, but as a practice of investigation. And so here I'm folding sheets of glass. I was very much thinking about how we call something handmade, but we can actually never touch the material by hand. And so I was really trying to figure out what would glass pieces look like if I would actually just touch them. And so these are some of the pieces that came out of this, and the curves that you get from that. Hand folding is really something you could not really make any other way. And then this is the last piece that I just made before the pandemic hit. It's called 4 Feet Apart. I didn't know we would all have to stay 6 feet apart just at that moment. And it was about how we often have to finish or break the relationships that we are in sometimes to really be able to see the other person, to also come together, to face each other, to be able to look into each other's eyes. And that was right at the moment when, for me, a major relationship in my life was really changing, and kind of reflecting on also that, how relationships in our life change over time. And so this collaborative work with dancers for me has been really important. These are 2 dancers from the Palluca College of Dance in Dresden. And I'm working now currently on another performance piece with a dancer, and would really like to continue this work. But because the pandemic happened, of course, this was all kind of put on ice. And I'm really excited about the possibilities we have of interaction of objects when they're used with human bodies, and how they can change meaning, and how through performance we can build a tension and a momentum that objects on by themselves don't necessarily have. So the kind of performative object is really something that I'm also very interested in. This is the last video here as well, and I am done. I would stop sharing screen if I can figure it out. So this is also, a lot of these video pieces are much longer and can never be shown in presentations like this. We are now 20 minutes past our time. So I think we probably should wrap it up. But if there are any questions for us, for those that want to stay around, I think we're happy to answer some questions if you have any.
Yeah, and we actually do have a couple in the queue, so maybe we can answer those and wrap up. We have from Mary Smith, and I think, and I know you've you've kind of done a lot of work internationally. It might be good for you to answer this one. It says, have you seen how other countries support glass art?
Yeah, unfortunately, the US is really the market with the most support for glass. In the world, the UK, Scotland, including in that, is in Europe, one of the other big countries. If you look to Scandinavia, you're very fortunate. If you live there, there's a lot of foundations, private foundations. There's a lot of government money that gets put into art. But specifically for glass, of course, the glass scene there isn't as big, although they have seen quite a revival in the last years. It is very hard. We always forget that when we think of kind of international glass scene, that we forget that it can be very difficult for some artists to have access to the internet, can't afford shipping internationally, participating internationally in exhibitions. So if you're in America, you're really in the fortunate place where you get most opportunities, where you have an enormous amount of different awards specifically for craft or for glass that you don't have in other countries. So there's also the highest density of schools where you can learn glass here. So the resources aren't as rich, but I think we cannot dismiss the kind of work that comes out of Europe, because it is very different than in the US. And we need that diversity to see what other artists in other countries with a different cultural sensibility make. And I think for me, it's always been very interesting to look into the other countries. And so one of the projects that I haven't talked about here that I've created is called Das Fernglas, which is an inbox format exhibition. Every month, everybody that subscribes, and you can do that on my website, you get an artwork delivered to your inbox. And that was really, I'm inviting artists from all over the world, and it is to no cost to the artist to participate, and it's no cost to the viewers that want to see it to view this art, because you do it at home on your computer. You get an email that is the artwork once a month. And so that was really to kind of like level the playing field maybe a little bit more in terms of thinking of an international market and international opportunities that everybody can participate in.
I have one more. I think this is more for Jessica specifically. It's about how, can you talk a little bit more about how the name Burnt Asphalt came about?
Sure. I was actually working at University of the Arts, and we were experimenting. This was in Philadelphia. And we were experimenting with trying out some different acts and doing some different processes. And that's a really small studio, and it has asphalt right on the outside. And so we had all these different names, and they all involved family, because we felt like family was really, really symbolic and important, because we were creating a family of support. And we were doing things, we were actually burning the asphalt. And so Sam Gear, who is this brilliant fabricator, maker, and really at that time we were like, he's so cool, said we should call it the Burnt Asphalt. And we were like, yeah, he's right. We're like a band, you know, like it's a similar kind of thing that happened. And so we adopted that. It was out of some humor, but also adding that word family on there. And that was kind of the origin of that. So.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much. I want to thank both of you again for doing the presentation. I think it was great. And thanks to everybody who showed up in the audiences. If you have other questions and you want to get in touch with Anna or Jessica, you can see their information on the screen below.
Mm-hmm.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Anna.
Bye, Jessica. It was lovely to spend an hour with you.
I know, you too. We'll talk soon.
Yes.
And good night, all. I have shared some things in the chat with you all so that you can click on there and go right to Jessica and Anna's sites. Also, go to the playlist where you can see the WheatonArts conversation, the Wheaton conversations, past, and this one will be up soon. And finally, if you need to get in touch, come to WheatonArts.org. Thank you both. Thank you, Alex, and thank you to all the audience. Good night, all.